It's often fascinating looking into the careers of animation directors and then jump from working in the animation story departments to eventually making their own movies. One such artist is Jimmy Hayward, who's directed 3 movies, 2 animated and 1 live action, and each one distinct from the other. He first got involved in computer animation over 3 decades ago and got his start at Mainframe Entertainment, where he was an animator on the television series Reboot. He then made his way to Pixar, where he initially served as an animator on Toy Story. He would animate on their subsequent features and even worked on the Toy Story animated storybook CD-ROM game. However, he'd long been itching to direct. After animating on Finding Nemo, he got a job at Blue Sky Studios, where he held multiple positions on robots, helping with the story and supervising multiple sequences. Following this, he was assigned to direct Horton Hears a Who alongside Steve Mattino. Hayward considered Horton his favorite childhood book and sought to make an adaptation worthy of that story and the Dr. Seuss name. The result ended up being a solid interpretation of the source material, understanding the themes and appeal, and the movie did a particularly good job of translating that familiar Seuss style to computer animation. This is a gorgeous looking movie with the characters and the depictions of Whoville and the Jungle of Nool having the right level of charm and color to them. Even with the necessity involved in stretching the story out to feature length, the film nonetheless stayed faithful to the book, and we see Horton's genuine concern in trying to help those living on this spec. The parallel stories of Horton and the mayor of Whoville are able to dive into the way those in power try to rile everyone up against something. The mayor, trying to warn everyone of what is happening, calls to mind how climate change is often ignored even when the signs are clear, while the kangaroo, seeing Horton's concern for that speck as a bad influence, is similar to the think of the children types who don't like anything that does not align with their views of the world. The kangaroo becomes someone who is easy to dislike, with Carol Burnett finding the right way to depict her attitude, but without going too overboard. Jim Carrey is also able to show Horton's caring nature and finds that balance between Horton's sensitivity and his usual comedic shtick. Although there is something I find unintentionally amusing about Carrey's performance here. Some have pointed out that Carrey has a similar acting style to Matt Frewer, who's most well known for playing Max Headroom. And of all of Carrey's roles, Horton is the one that sounds exactly like Frewer. It's uncanny. The humor works more often than not. My favorite bits usually involving the mayor's slapstick scenes and his attempts to take care of the situation. His growing friendship with Horton is quite sweet too. While there are a few random parts, like a sequence done in the style of Japanese animation and the big dance party ending that was common in animated movies at the time, I don't find them too much of a distraction. Horton Hears a Who is overall a nice film that does bring a smile to my face every time I watch it. When 20th Century Fox and Blue Sky acquired the film rights to Horton Hears a Who, that also included Horton Hatches the Egg. However, despite the movie's box office success, it was never made for some reason, which is kind of a shame, as I would have liked to see them tackle that story. Next, Jimmy Hayward signed on to a project very far removed from Dr. Seuss, a movie about the DC Comics character Jonah Hex. He was certainly a surprising choice, but it showed his willingness to try all kinds of genres and not stick to one particular filmmaking style. Although, ironically, Jonah Hex would open the same day as Toy Story 3. The movie was a colossal flop and was panned by critics, and watching it, it's not difficult to see why few were impressed by it. The thing that most jumps out about it is the runtime. Usually these kinds of comic book movies run close to over 2 hours. This movie, 81 minutes, and that includes the end credits. Jonah Hex was somehow over 20 minutes shorter than the animated family film playing right next door. This is clearly an example of the studio ordering several cuts to the movie, as the editing is incredibly choppy and it seems to race from scene to scene to get Jonah to the climax as quickly as possible. That makes it difficult to create any sort of investment in his character or anyone else who walks on screen. They're all one note and uninteresting, whether it's the main villain, played by John Malkovich, or the prostitute who teams up with Jonah. Everyone feels like their screen time has been severely cut down in post-production. Josh Brolin has the toughest role to play as he talks through his teeth the entire time. I get the film was trying to go for a Clint Eastwood thing here, but it does not quite work. There are small hints of what the movie could have been in Hayward's likely desire to direct a fun western, but this is definitely a case where the film was hurt in the editing room, and I don't blame Hayward for how the final movie turned out. Brolin himself would blame Warner Brothers for what he felt was a rushed production that they later took over in post. He also threw some criticisms towards Hayward, but he would later apologize for those remarks. He would then return to animation for the movie Freebirds, co-writing the screenplay with Scott Mosier, Kevin Smith's longtime producing partner. For those who need a reminder of what this movie is about, it's about a couple of turkeys who go back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get turkeys off the menu. That's right, they're going back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get turkeys off the menu. Feels like it's internet law to mention that anytime Freebirds is brought up. Despite how heavily memed the premise is, I do think it was one with a lot of potential. And for the first act, the movie does display a decent amount of cleverness as we see Reggie get pardoned by the president and eventually pampered. The entire sequence where they break into a secret location to steal the time machine is genuinely funny with a lot of great gags, so I was definitely excited to see what wackiness would await the turkeys once they arrived back in time to get themselves off the menu. However, the rest of the movie was surprisingly ordinary in its execution, and the pacing slowed for me. We get some human villains who I don't find all that interesting, and the humor did not register as much for me. Reggie gets a love interest who is not given much of a compelling personality, and when the movie attempts to go serious at one point, it does not feel earned. I see what the movie was trying to do here by making turkeys an allegory for indigenous Americans, but it fell short there. By the way, if you watch Freebirds, don't think too much about how the time travel works, because it makes no sense. Like I said, I think the movie has its moments here and there, particularly in the beginning, but I wish it had done more creative things with its premise once they actually get to 1621. This was basically how I felt about the movie when I originally saw it in theaters, and my opinion stayed exactly the same watching it again now. Like Jonah Hex, this also feels like a movie that was hurt by corporate decision-making. When Hayward set on to direct, the film was planned to be released in November 2014, with John Strauss, David Stern, and Craig Mazin writing the script. However, at the last minute, relatively media decided to move up the film's date a whole year earlier to November 2013, which likely caused the production to finish quicker than anticipated. Hayward and Scott Mosier would end up doing a rewrite and eventually got full screenplay credit. I think if the film had kept its original release date and been allowed to cook just a little bit longer, it would have helped the finished film. The decision to open it on that date also meant Freebirds had to deal with Frozen a few weeks later, and that grabbing all the family attention. As a result, the film underperformed at the box office. Despite all this, I do think the movie made for an okay diversion, and you definitely see his creativity peek through on several occasions. It is also currently the last feature film Jimmy Hayward has directed. Since then, he has primarily worked with bands and musicians on various projects, including Les Claypool and Primus. Jim Carrey also commissioned him to animate one of his paintings. In sadder news, he was diagnosed with a type of bone cancer that required multiple operations and surgeries. Those aforementioned musicians who he befriended even put together a benefit concert for him to raise funds for his medical treatment. But through those tough and difficult times, he still made it clear he would always strive to create and fuel his imagination. Several months ago, Jimmy Hayward announced he was cancer-free. I hope his health continues to improve, and whatever he ends up directing next, I look forward to checking it out, as he's clearly a filmmaker with a passion and excitement for what he does, whether it's adapting a classic Dr. Seuss story or directing a comedy about time-traveling turkeys. See you next time.